The Curtiss C-46 Commando is a somewhat unknown World War II-era transport, heavily overshadowed by the Douglas C-47. The C-46 deserves to be brought to light, so that's what I'm going to try to do today. The basis for the C-46, the CW-20, was developed in 1937. The CW-20 was meant to be a high-altitude, pressurized airliner meant to compete with the Boeing 307 Stratocruiser and the Douglas DC-4. The CW-20 was the first instance of the figure-8 or double-bubble fuselage design that later went on to be a major design feature of the Boeing C-97 Stratofreighter. The sides of the fuselage increased the level of the floor that separated the two portions and shared the stress of each section, rather than supporting itself. This also allowed the wing spar to run through the cargo bay instead of taking up passenger space. It was decided for the CW-20 to have two higher-powered engines instead of four smaller engines, although a version with four engines was drawn up and designated the Model 20 or P240, depending on where you look. 3 years of extensive wind tunnel testing and design changes concluded with the CW-20 design. A full-size mock-up of the CW-20 was built in 1938 and exhibited at the 1939 World's Fair. Many companies approached Curtiss with interest in the concept, but nobody ended up purchasing the CW-20. The CW-20 was powered by two Wright 2600 twin cyclone engines, producing 1700 prop horsepower per engine. The first test flight of the prototype was conducted on March 26, 1940. The prototype originally flew with a twin-tail design, like the B-24, but after testing, the outside fins were removed and a single large fin was fitted in its place. This prototype was purchased by the United States Army Air Forces and was designated the C-55. It was later returned to Curtiss and resold to British Overseas Airways and subsequently scrapped in 1943. On September 13, 1940, 46 modified CW-20s were ordered by the United States Army Air Force. These were designated C-46A-1-CU and given the nickname Commando. The first 30 airframes delivered to the Army Air Force were sent back to Curtiss for 53 immediate modifications. None of the Commandos delivered were pressurized. The design was again modified, this time receiving larger cargo doors, a strengthened load floor, and a convertible cabin, for an easy switch between cargo carrying and troops. This was the version that was unveiled to the public in 1942. A total of 200 C-46As in two batches were ordered in 1940, although only two were actually delivered by the 7th of December 1941, and for this batch an important change was made. Going forward, the Commando would use more powerful Pratt & Whitney 2800 double Wasp radial engines, producing 2,000 prop horsepower. By November of 1943, over 700 changes have been made to the Commando, including a reduction in cabin windows and changes to the fuel system. The Commando is most famous for its work in the Pacific theater of World War II, where it hauled cargo over the Himalayan mountains. This was known as the Hump. Other aircraft like the C-87 Liberator Express, which is a modified B-24 Liberator, the C-54 Skymaster, and C-108, which is a modified B-17, but none were as successful as the C-46. Since the C-46 was able to handle the fast-changing weather conditions, these conditions contributed to many C-87 losses. Despite being a maintenance headache, the Commando proved its worth in airlift operations, as it could carry more cargo, fly higher and faster than any other airplane in the theater. The Commando could stay in flight on one engine if not overloaded, but since this was the middle of World War II, the cargo safety rules were thrown out the window, and these airplanes were usually grossly overloaded with as much cargo as they could fit. The C-46 was referred to by air traffic control as the flying coffin, as the C-46 had a tendency to just explode or catch fire. There were at least 30 instances of this from 1943 to 1945, with many others disappearing and not having been found. The C-46's huge cargo volume, twice that of the C-47, 3 times the weight, large cargo doors, and long range also made it suitable for the vast distances of the Pacific Island Campaign. In particular, the U.S. Marines found the aircraft, known as the R-5C, useful in their Pacific operations, flying supplies and wounded personnel out of numerous and hastily built island landing strips. The C-46 also served in other theaters of World War II, but not in the numbers of the C-47. In the European theater, the C-46 was mainly known for its use in Operation Varsity, but so many of them were shot down, 19 of the 72 deployed, that it was forbidden to use the C-46 in any other paratrooper operations. After World War II, many C-46s were sold as surplus on the civilian market. Many of these were exported to South and Central America. A decent number of commandos remained in the United States. the largest operator of the commando post-war being Zantop International Airways. They operated at least 51 Curtiss C-46s out of Willow Run Airport in Michigan, until they were retired and replaced by the Lockheed Electra and the Douglas DC-6 in the mid-1960s. The Flying Tiger Line, Civil Air Transport, and Capital Airways were also big C-46 operators. The commando was also used in many military operations post-war. The United States Armed Forces used the commando in Korea and Vietnam, not retiring it officially until 1968. A dozen C-46s were also purchased by Israel and used in their war for independence. They were flown from Czechoslovakia, bringing disassembled S-199 Bf-109 fighters, and on the way back they would drop bombs from their cargo doors. Japan briefly used the commando until at least 1978, and China operated them until 1982. The commando was briefly used on passenger routes, but due to the higher operating costs, 50% more than the C-47, and high fuel use, the commando was shortly relegated to cargo operations. Though the commando was briefly used in North America, the commando was mainly used in South and Central America, where many of them were exploded post-war. They continued to be used in Colombia until 2006, when one crashed, killing all 3 crew members aboard, but most commandos were scrapped by the 1980s. The C-46 had many different variants. The first variant was the CW-20. This was the original prototype. It was fitted with twin tails and had Wright R2600 radial engines, later redesignated the C-55. The first production airplane in the lineup was the C-46A. This replaced the 2600 radial engines with Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engines. This was fitted with a large port-side cargo door, strengthened the cargo floor, added a hydraulic cargo winch, and folding seats for up to 40 troops. 3 of them were converted to crew trainers. This was designated the TC-46A. The XC-46B is the next in the lineup. This was converted to have a stepped windscreen and a 2100 horsepower water-injected engines. The next was the C-46D and TC-46D. This was fitted with an extra door for cargo operations. 1,610 of them were built, and 15 were converted to crew trainers. The C-46E was fitted with a stepped windscreen, and the 4-bladed Curtiss propellers were switched with 3-blade Hamilton standard propellers. 17 were converted from the C-46B. The C-46F was fitted with a cargo door on both sides and had square wingtips instead of the rounded wingtips found on the rest of the C-46 variants. The XC-113 was fitted on one side with a General Electric T-51 turboprop engine. This handled so poorly on the ground that it was never flown. The AC-46K is an unbuilt gunship variant. It was to be fitted with the Wright 3350 duplex Cyclone engines. These are the same engines that are on the B-29 Superfortress. The CW-28 is a C-46 fitted with a nose gear instead of the standard tail dragger configuration. And the last version was the Model 24. This is a 4-engine version of the CW-20, fitted with 4 Wright R2800 Cyclone engines. This one was also never built. As of 2025, a few C-46s remain in service. Buffalo Airways has 2 airworthy commandos, registered as CFAVO and CGTPO. A third commando, CGTXW, landed gear up in 2015. The airplane was a write-off and is currently used as a parts airplane to keep Buffalo's other commandos airworthy. Everett has 4 airworthy commandos, registered as N1822M, Salmonella, N1837M, Hot Stuff, N7848, Dumbo, and N1651, which is nameless. Another commando is in storage in Gimli, registered as CGIBX, and is reported for sale. A few more are stored in Bolivia, with one even having an airliner interior. There are also 2 museums that keep 46s airworthy. The Commemorative Air Force has a C-46D called China Doll, but due to severe corrosion, it has not flown since 2019. The Military Aviation Museum has a C-46F named Tinkerbell. A further 50 are on display at various museums or in storage. A few more are registered in Brazil, but there have been no reported sightings of these airplanes since at least 2015, and they are presumed scrapped. There are also quite a few wrecks still laying around. The most famous of these is the commando that crashed in Norman's Cay in the Bahamas in 1980. I'm sure almost everybody has seen a picture of this wreck. There are also a few good condition wrecks in Alaska and Canada. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, as it helps me out quite a bit. Anyways, bye for now.